Welcome to the Enneagram with Chelsea and Nicole. Today we are talking about how the Enneagram is different from all those personality assessments, all those tests that we've taken over the years, all those leadership development constructs we've been introduced to within the context of our corporate or other professional organizations. And some of those are Myers-Briggs, the DISC model, Big Five, Strength Finders, which we've previously mentioned. So want to hear a little bit about, how is the Enneagram different from all of those other kind of personality frameworks?
Yeah, Chelsea, well, you might be able to speak to this a little bit more too, in a different way. I mean, have focused on the Enneagram, for so many years, and I've been exposed and tried to keep up with all of these other personality tools that come along. And I do have some experience in them, but what I find as I'm working with people who have, had vast experiences with all of these, and even I can say a common thing that I hear all the time, even with people who've gone to therapy, is people will say, out of all of the personality tools, and even my therapist, like, I have gotten way more insights and awareness and like eureka moments, with the Enneagram. So that's a consistent thing that I hear comparatively, and pretty high percentages. And even though I'll say, I do think that, all of these tools can help to different degrees, and there's a place for all of them. But one of the things that we've kind of talked about before that's a huge difference is that the Enneagram isn't meant to simplify. It's not meant to reduce or categorize necessarily. It's much more of a map. So if you, in that metaphor, if you have a lot of landscape and territory and, enormous, vast lands of the human, realities inside, that the Enneagram provides much more of a map rather than certain categories that we can easily or quickly go to identify in a more prescriptive way. And I think in general, that's one thing that I notice about leadership development programs and tools is they tend to be very prescriptive. They start and end. And even though I believe that prescriptions can be useful, usually in the very beginning, it's a places to start. But if we are only, engaging in prescriptive thinking, which is, I think, a habit that we've been conditioned to do, I think that we're limiting our growth and we're limiting our expansiveness because we're not that easy. It's not that easy. It's an incredibly contextual, humans live in incredibly contextual spaces that are nuanced, and who we are and what we become and how we disintegrate and how we experience stress and how we grow and how we flourish is incredibly nuanced and vast, and cannot really be reduced in the ways that I observe and in the ways that I hear other tools tend to do. But speak to your experience, Chelsea.
Yeah,
you've worked with some of these, and you've been forced to work with several. So what is your experience?
Well, I think it's hilarious because I cannot for the life of me remember my own Myers-Briggs type. I have taken that test so many times, and that just shows you how it's not helpful for me from a self-awareness or from a team dynamics perspective, because it's not reflective or resonant enough that I can even remember 4 letters. So for me, that's my personal experience with that. And then Strength Finders is another one that I actually really loved when I took it. But I think anytime that a test like that can change, and all of a sudden 10 years later, or the context of where you're working or what's important to you, or just having gotten through a pandemic, when all of a sudden your top 5 strengths are different, that to me is an alarm bell that something is off. It's the starting place, right? If the construct is helpful, or if it starts to create some language or conversations about how to lean into strengths, that's one thing. But like any tool used as the ultimate source of knowledge, that's obviously, it's unrealistic.
Enneagram can't do that either. And I think that people often have the same experience with the Enneagram. And that's why I would say that any tool that we approach, it should be at first an exploration. And in my experience, the people who approach the Enneagram, I would say Yeah, like 8 out of 10 times mistype themselves, and about 9 out of 10 times mistype others. So that's, so in some ways, people can have a similar experience with the Enneagram where things change and they're not sure who they, or they're overly confident in a type that actually isn't super accurate, that it's actually not located very accurately. I also think the other tools, I think might be designed for change. Like I think, there's certain tools that I know that actually say that, within the tool, people change over time. And the Enneagram might be different than that. The Enneagram, so, just for our audience, the Enneagram assumes that we are born our type, and that there's been several studies over the years on twins. So that's one way, that it's been studied. It's been studied many ways, but that's one way. But the Enneagram believes it's both nature and nurture, right? So, however, is that ultimately that we're born with a type and as a type, and it does not change. However, nurture plays a wildly powerful role in how our personality develops, but mainly in terms of how healthy it becomes or how unhealthy it becomes. So that's one thing that perhaps is different. So that whatever our type is, it does not change. However, the tool is a transformation tool. And so what your type is becomes less important over time. So this is another key factor, is that the goal, like I have stated in, before, is to become the best of every type, to actually integrate into all 9 types of us, so that whatever type we were born with becomes a little less and less important over time. So that's the so the focus doesn't remain solely on what your core type is.
Flicks with what other operating say, this is you, this is what you're good at, lean in. And it actually becomes a confirmation bias of, this is who I am. It's an identity I can assume and wear. And oftentimes people use that as a badge of honor, but it can become unhelpful when that's the excuse, or that's the reason, or like there's a bad behavior that comes to light and it's like, oh, it's because, and you can fill that in because of any of these operating types, including the Enneagram. And so it's really
very much including the Enneagram. And I would want to say that this is exactly how the Enneagram is also misused and weaponized. And I can speak from my own experience as an 8. It was awesome in my beginning journey into the Enneagram, where my 8-ness was like you, and like most people, you understand yourself, right, a lot more thoroughly and deeply than you ever did before. And then it becomes a huge point of validation for all of us. And it should in a good way. And then how most beginners, and I am included in this, ended up being a huge justification for a lot of my 8 ways that allowed me to dig in even more to, a lot of the negative things about 8's energy and kind of dominance and insensitivities. It's like, well, I'm an 8, get over it, right? And it's like, this is how I'm built. Bring me a war, bring me a mountain, bring me an impossible problem. That's what I'm here for. Otherwise, get out of my way, right? And yet that approach, that attitude, from this place of validation, which is essentially good, the misuse of that is that it actually becomes a way that we justify being more lodged into our core type, and in some of the less healthy ways. So this is my point to having this conversation, Chelsea, with you, is that this happens because it's a human problem. No matter what tool humans are using, this happens. And the Enneagram is not an exception to that. So it's really much more, when we look at the differences, it's more about what its purpose is and how it was designed to be used, rather than like how humans use it. Humans are going to misuse everything, and they're going to weaponize everything in their favor. Is just what humans do. So, and I don't want to exclude the Enneagram from that. That's actually a very important point when we're approaching the Enneagram, and just like anything, is that how are we using the tools that we have?
I've found a couple of things helpful. One of them was thinking about it less as a personality type and more as an operating type, because that helped me surface language around the core fear or the core desire that we were operating out of, which is where so many of the behaviors that end up matching some of the personality types become exposed. And then another really, really simple thing that early in my journey was helpful to me, I have to thank you for this, was as a two and a helper, simply asking the question, would it be helpful if I, and filling in the blank, instead of carrying as a badge of honor that I was here to save the world and help everyone as a source for my own personal worth and validation. And so the interesting thing I think about our conversation is that it's not an invitation like any of the other personality types to start and finish that journey, right? To have a full understanding. It's actually an invitation to understand and have self-awareness about where we're starting, but also an invitation to leave that space. Tell us more about like what the real goal, the true transformational work is.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I don't know how many other Enneagram teachers or experts do this. Because I come from tech in a past life and also Hollywood in a past life, but tech in particular, to me, my modern language is, I call them actually operating systems. That's how I've referred to them, and that's how I teach it but I acknowledge this is a very modern language. Of course, the ancients did not speak about, the types as operating systems. But for me, the metaphor is useful in the sense that we are coded, that there is a code, that they are a language, right? They're coded in a particular language for a particular purpose and for a particular use. And that is, there's a parallel there, even though, every metaphor breaks at some point. But as a beginning place to understand, I speak about the types as operating systems, and that because that's useful to me. The idea is, metaphorically, is to actually to be upgraded to include all of the codes, like all of the operational systems, like to have that language uploaded. And we have it actually. So this is where the metaphor breaks, right? Like we're actually all born with all 9 types. We just have a core type, a default type. And so really it's more about accessing them. But they're in this access, and in the metaphor, maybe there is a kind of uploading that we do, or an upgrading that we do in that the moments of where we're deeply integrated now in ways that we weren't before. The Enneagram for me, and in my practice, it's about returning to this deep practice of recognizing and understanding that we're all 9 types, and to be integrated and connected and located in all of them. And when we do that with an understanding of where we're starting from and where our kind of strongest, default lies, that's a different process for each type. Like how 8s become integrated with certain types is different from how 2s, that's the differences. How we integrate as individuals outside of the Enneagram, just as our unique beings, and then how we integrate, from the basis of our core type, our default type, is very different. And it depends on each individual. And this is something that I'll say too, Chelsea, that you've heard me say a million times, but kind of harkens back to your original question, which is, I think this is the problem with programmatic learning, especially when it comes to human growth. There's certain kind of learning, certain kind of maths and engineering where this is a perfect kind of learning, where you have a program and you take step by step and it's very linear and boom, you've got it. With human growth and development, it's not so. And when we have too much of a program that we're giving to everyone, we lose a lot of the nuance and context that the individual experiences. And most humans learn from a direct experience, something that we're experiencing in ourselves, something that we're experiencing in our relations. And so that's the point where we really need, I think for most of us, it is a need. The growth actually happens inside a certain contact with a direct experience, and our experiences are both internal and external, and locating those and working with those. And a lot of that is liminal spaces, the internal to the external, these transition places. That requires a lot of mastery because there's nuance and complexity there. And so how we, approach it requires far more sensitivity and a holistic intelligence than what any program can provide. So I'll say this, I'm not against programs. I think they're a great place to start. Like I've said before, like sometimes you need a baseline, and a program will provide a particular baseline from which to begin. But if we only are doing those things, if we're only reading a book or we're taking a class that isn't specifically focused on you as an individual and where you're particularly getting stopped, and then working within those spaces individually, I think that our learning is far slower at best, and at worst ineffective entirely.
Absolutely. I know my experience has been that the power of the Enneagram was within the context and having a partner and thinking through real life contextual experiences. And then the superseding value is when you have groups of people who all have their type located. That's when the real strategies start to come to life in an exponential fashion. So in our next podcast, we're going to be talking about some of the trickier parts of what to do with this, amazing, exciting opportunity, and how to take steps in getting started. So keep listening to hear more on that. In the meantime, if you're interested to reach out to us or learn more, you can find us on LinkedIn. Thanks so much.